that you're probably very tired of Beatles questions, but even if we never have this long-anticipated and eagerly awaited reunion that the whole world hopes for with the Beatles, do you think that there would ever be a chance of another Lennon-McCartney song, maybe just one song from you guys?
Well, I wouldn't say there would be, actually, because the last time I spoke to John, I just happened to ask him about whether he was writing songs and stuff, just out of my own curiosity. And he's told me he's kind of finished doing that, and he's not really into that. But which, when you say it to people, they say, oh, well, this big disappointment, or he must have gone crazy or something. But if you think about it, most of us do our jobs to arrive at a point where we no longer have to do our jobs, where we put our feet up and we can enjoy life for a change. And I think he's probably reached that point.
Well, you haven't reached that point, so the work must still be...
And you can enjoy life, huh?
The work must still be important.
So it is the Martha Zoller Show. This was an interview that was done just a couple of months before the death of John Lennon in 1980, which is very poignant because there actually have been a Lennon-McCartney song that was released that was found in the last few years, but it was actually done before the Beatles broke up. But it just never, I think it was called Now and Then was the name of the song. So I just thought that was interesting because of the timing of this interview. There is, and how his description of retirement, and I think that's kind of what people used to describe retirement as, is that, retirement is where you don't do work anymore and then you put your feet up and get to enjoy life, as if when you're working, you're not enjoying life. So I think that things have changed a lot, right? Since this was made. This was 45 years ago that interview was done. Paul McCartney's still working. He's announced a U.S. tour, which, frankly, I can't afford the tickets for. I looked him up, and because I've seen him 5 times, and I saw him last in 2019, BC, before COVID, and the show was so great, I thought to myself, I don't think I'm going to do it again because I don't know if he could be as good as he was right here. So he's still working. He's still doing what he loves doing because it's an avocation. I think that all of us have those kinds of things. I don't think today, and tell me if I'm wrong, I'd love to hear from you, today the idea of retirement being, okay, we're just going to stop working and we're going to sit in our living room for the rest of our lives and do what we want to do. I don't think that works. So I think that people are younger than they were at the same age. My grandmother looked really old at 65. She lived a long time. She lived to be 93. My mother looked a lot younger than my grandmother at 65, and I think I look younger than my mother did at 65. So my most favorite part of my trip, I shouldn't say my most favorite part because it was great spending time with Lynn and all the places we saw. Everything about the trip was great. But the shock on people's faces when I told them how old I was, because I love telling people how old I am, because they always think I'm a lot younger than I am. And that's a good thing. I love that. But it's the luck of the draw, folks. I think that I could tell definitely in England, the air's a lot drier there, and my skin was a lot drier. I think if I had lived in England my entire life, my skin would not look as good as it does now. One of the good things about living where we do is the humidity, girls, right, makes us glow all the time, and it makes our skin look younger all the time. So we'll see how all that plays out. But I did love the fact that I literally had a couple of men in a pub give me a high five when I told them how old I was. My husband was right there, and they were asking. I think it was because we were talking about retirement, and so then they were like, well, how old are you? And we told them, and they were like, wow, high five, you're doing good. And I always say my husband takes good care of me. That's why I look so good. And he doesn't ask how much it costs. So anyway, you can join us on the phones at 770-535-2911. My old friend, Sam Richwine, who was a plastic surgeon here for a long time, he did a couple of things for me over the years. I had a little work done to my nose, and I had some veins. I remember calling him up saying, my legs look like the road map of Texas. Do you think you can do anything about them? Because I have a lot of varicose veins and always have. God doesn't give you everything, okay? But he says, well, it depends on if they're super highways or they're back roads. So, but he was always funny. But I remember him calling me up one time because I wrote an article about the work that I had done and how happy I was with it. And he goes, Martha, you don't have to tell him everything. And I said, no, but about things like this, I think it's important that you not go through and say, oh, no, I would never do that when you know that you have. Okay. So what I try to do here is be real. Okay. I want to be real about what's going on in my life to a point. I did get a letter from prison one time that made me realize that I was talking about my children way too specifically, because this letter that I got, it was back when Steve Cronick was sheriff. I got this letter that was threatening my family from, and this is sometimes, they say you haven't lived in this business until you get a letter from jail. Well, I could have done without that. But it was this letter that was threatening members of my family, and I immediately called the sheriff, and he came down, a detective came down and looked at the letter. And, thankfully the perpetrator was stupid because his fingerprints were all over the letter. And of course, as you would expect that someone would write a stupid letter like that, he had a record. Okay. And so they knew exactly who he was. And it turned out at that point in time, he was incarcerated. And so they were able to, follow up on it. Let's just put it that way. And make sure that I didn't get bothered by that person anymore. But there are things that come along. I also had, I went out to my car one time, and there was a CD on my windshield with some very, very violent stuff on this CD with the threat that that's what they were going to do to me if they ever got a chance to. And I also called, the Hall County Sheriff's Department. In those rare instances where these things have happened, they have been Johnny on the spot and taken care of the situation. But that was the one that shook me up a little more, that even though I'm very transparent about who I am and where I am, and I probably talk way too much about where I live, but I do have a very large dog that will protect me. The fact that this person had come into the parking lot where my car was parked and put this on my windshield while I was at work, because I don't stay all day, that shook me up more than getting the letter at the radio station, because that many knew what my car looked like. And I say he because we know who did this eventually, and that person was charged and convicted. But it was, those things happen, but you can't be afraid. It's like when I went to Iraq. You cannot be afraid when you do things like that. You got to know that God's going to take care of you and that you're going to take the precautions that you can take. But I've had a rich and wonderful and beautiful life, okay? And my husband and I say this to each other twice a day when we say our prayers in the morning and in the evening. We say, thank you, Lord, for another day, because the problems we have are small problems. And I think we have to keep things in perspective. I know all of us want to be hair on fire every day about every slight that we get from people of a political persuasion that we don't agree with. But it's not that darn important. What's more important is that you take care of you and yours and the people that you come in contact with life. What I think, and I don't want to preach about this, but I think it's important on a Friday going into the weekend. What God wants us to do is to be the best version of ourselves every single day. And I try very hard to do that. I fail probably more often than I succeed. But I try to be humble about it. But I wouldn't be in this business if I didn't have an ego. Okay. And that's the thing I always have to work on. I always have to work on keeping things in perspective. So I'm sharing all this with you, because, we are connected because of this show that I do. And I have a letter right here that somebody sent me that was a very positive one, thanking me for some of the work that I've done. And I got to tell you, I have had thousands more of those than the 2 or 3 that have scared me in the course of my career. Okay, so I always have to not focus on, and that's just me, I focus on the positive, not the negative. And that's really why Lynn Zoller is such a good match for me. my mother-in-law never interfered in our lives. But before we got married, she sat me down and she said, you know, you're a very optimistic person, and Lynn is not. I don't want him to bring you down. And that is as interfering as she got in our entire lives. And I still laugh and smile about it. And when I tell this story to my father-in-law, who lost her a little over a year ago, it makes him smile too, because it was just like her. But I'm a half full kind of person. My husband is kind of half empty, okay? But together we make a full glass. And the problem I have is I'm so positive about things sometimes that I'll go off the cliff without realizing it. But he's always there to pull me back before I do. And that's why it works well for us. Listen, go to WDUN.travels, sign up for that trip, and you'll get to meet Lynn Zoller, and it'll be a lot of fun. Have a great weekend, and stay with us, because we're always here, always local.